It arrived on a Tuesday morning, a thin sliver of an email in an inbox crowded with board meeting reminders and quarterly revenue projections. The subject line was simply, Thanksgiving. No exclamation point, no warmth, just a single declarative word. It was from my mother. For a moment, I just stared at it. The cursor blinked rhythmically, a tiny, pulsing heartbeat on the screen. It's funny, the things that can stop a CEO in her tracks, not a market downturn, not a hostile takeover bid, but a one-word subject line from a woman who hadn't willingly called me in 6 months. My finger hovered over the delete button. It would be so easy. A simple click and the obligation would vanish into the digital ether. No one would even notice. They probably wouldn't expect me to come anyway. I was Clara, the afterthought, the quiet space at the end of the dinner table. My presence was optional, my absence expected. But something made me click it open. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, maybe it was a flicker of that stupid, stubborn hope that refuses to die no matter how many times you try to smother it. The email was short, clinical. Clara, we'll be having Thanksgiving dinner at 2 p.m. Jessica and Brent are coming, of course. Brent just got a huge promotion, and we're all so thrilled. Jessica thinks they've finally found the perfect house in the Greenwich Estates. We'll have a lot to celebrate. Let me know if you're coming so I can set a place. Mom. I read it twice. Not a single question about my life. Not a, how are you? Or a, hope you're doing well. It wasn't an invitation. It was a bulletin. An announcement of the continued success and brilliance of my older sister Jessica and her fiancé Brent, the man my mother referred to as a real catch. My role, as always, was to be a spectator in their gilded lives. Let me know if you're coming so I can set a place. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. It implied my place wasn't permanent. It was something to be added, an extra chair to be pulled from the garage, a temporary fixture in a celebration that wasn't mine. A cold, familiar weariness washed over me. It was a feeling I'd known my whole life, a feeling like being a ghost in my own home. I could walk through the rooms, see the family photos on the wall, Jessica on her graduation day from Yale, Jessica on her horse, Jessica on vacation in Paris with my parents, but I was nowhere to be found. It was as if my existence had been carefully, methodically edited out. I leaned back in my leather office chair, the skyline of the city sprawling out behind my window, a kingdom of glass and steel that I had built. From this height, the people below were just tiny dots, insignificant. And in that moment, I felt like one of those dots, even in my own family's narrative. The email was a trigger, unlocking a cascade of memories I usually kept locked away in a tightly sealed box in the back of my mind. The box was labeled "Do Not Open," but the seal was broken now. The ghosts of Thanksgiving's past were swirling in my office, their whispers as cold as the November air outside. I thought about the decision I had made 2 years ago, the precise moment the last bit of familial duty had shattered inside me, leaving behind something cold, hard, and sharp. The moment I had stopped trying to earn their love and started planning my escape. This Thanksgiving, things would be different. I wasn't going back to seek their approval. I wasn't going back hoping for a crumb of affection. I had spent a lifetime being invisible. Now I was going back to see if, after all this time, they could finally see me. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and began to type my reply. I'll be there. The words looked so simple on the screen, but they felt like a declaration of war. Before I could change my mind, my fingers were already flying across the keyboard, pulling up a folder hidden deep within my personal server. The folder was named simply Receipts. It was my private museum of grievances, a meticulously curated archive of a lifetime of slates. And it all started with a car. I was 9 years old. For my birthday, I'd received a book on basic programming. For my sister Jessica's 16th birthday, 7 years my senior, she received a brand new cherry red BMW 3 Series, complete with a giant bow on the hood. I remember standing on the lawn, the smell of cut grass and gasoline in the air, watching the sun glint off the perfect paint. My father beamed, clapping my sister's future husband on the back, while my mother shed tears of joy. Jessica was the golden child, the one destined for greatness. She was their masterpiece. I was the rough draft they'd forgotten to throw away. The disparity wasn't just in gifts, it was in investments. Jessica went to Westfield Academy, a private school where the tuition cost more than my father's car. I went to the local public school, Franklin High. I remember asking my mother why, my voice small in the cavernous kitchen. She was wiping down the granite countertops, her movements brisk and efficient. She didn't even look at me. Jessica just needs more, honey, more stimulation. She's gifted. You're doing just fine where you are. Just fine? That phrase became the anthem of my childhood. Jessica was exceptional. Jessica was brilliant. I was just fine. I was adequate, sufficient, unremarkable. It was a label branded onto my soul. While Jessica took French lessons, violin lessons, and summer trips to Europe to broaden her horizons, I was in the public library, teaching myself C++ from dusty, dog-eared books. While she was at an expensive summer camp for aspiring equestrians, I was bagging groceries at the local supermarket, saving every dollar in a small, worn bank account. The ultimate proof came the summer I turned 17. I'd been accepted into a prestigious 6-week summer coding camp at Stanford. It was a dream come true, a ticket out of my small Connecticut town and into a world that I felt understood me. The cost was $5,000. I'd saved up half, and I naively asked my parents if they could help with the rest. My father looked at me over the top of his newspaper, his expression one of mild annoyance, as if I'd asked him to solve a complex calculus problem. "Clara, we just don't have that kind of money lying around," he said, his voice flat. "Jessica's first wedding is coming up. Everything is going towards that." Jessica's first wedding, to Ethan, a man from a good family who worked in finance. It was an extravagant affair, with an ice sculpture and a string quartet. It cost over $100,000. My $5,000 dream didn't stand a chance. The message was clear. My future was a frivolous expense compared to Jessica's perfectly curated present. That was the first time I felt something truly break inside me. It wasn't just disappointment. It was the cold, hard realization that in the family's ledger, my ambitions were worthless. I stayed home that summer and got a second job. I didn't go to Stanford. I went to the University of Connecticut on a full academic scholarship. The day I got the acceptance letter, a full ride, I told them at dinner. My father nodded, said, "Good for you, Clara," and then immediately changed the subject to Jessica's new promotion at a marketing firm in Manhattan. My celebration was a quiet dinner at Applebee's. When Jessica got into Yale a few years earlier, they threw a garden party for 50 people and paid her tuition in full, never once mentioning the word loan. Her success was a community triumph. Mine was a private, solitary achievement. University was my escape. I buried myself in computer science and mathematics. I worked 2 part-time jobs, not because I had to, but because it kept me busy, kept me from thinking about the hollow space where a family's love was supposed to be. In my 3rd year, I started taking on freelance programming gigs. One of my first clients, a small local retailer, was struggling with inventory management. I built them a custom software solution over a single caffeine-fueled weekend. They paid me $6,500. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. But more than the money, it was the validation. Someone saw my work, my skill, and they assigned it a value, a real, tangible value. Within 6 months, through word of mouth alone, 10 other local businesses had contacted me, asking for the same solution. A light bulb went off in my head. This wasn't just a freelance gig. This was a business. I switched to part-time studies and poured every ounce of my energy into developing the software. I called it Supply Sync. It was a comprehensive supply chain management platform, intuitive and scalable. By the time I graduated, at 22, I had a functioning company with a small but growing client base. My family, of course, barely noticed. To them, I was just playing on my computer. The concept that my hobby was a legitimate business, let alone a potentially lucrative one, was completely beyond their comprehension. They were too busy planning Jessica's bachelorette party in Miami. Thank you for being here with me. As I dig into all this, it means a lot to know I'm not just talking into the void. If you don't mind, please let me know what city you're listening from in the comments below. It's comforting to know where my story is reaching. The real breaking point, the moment that transformed years of quiet resentment into a cold, calculated plan of action, happened 2 years before that fateful Thanksgiving. It arrived, as most of my family's demands did, through a telephone call. By then, Supply Sync was no longer a dorm room project. We had an office, a team of 12 employees, and we were on the verge of landing our first national retail client. I was working 18-hour days, fueled by cheap coffee and the exhilarating terror of building something from nothing. I was in the middle of a late-night coding session, trying to squash a particularly nasty bug, when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. My heart did a familiar little dip. A call from my mother usually meant one of two things. She needed something, or she had news about Jessica. It was never just to say hello. "Clara, honey, do you have a minute?" Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone she only used when she was about to ask for a significant favor. "I'm a little busy, Mom. What's up?" I tried to keep my voice neutral, leaning back from my screen, the lines of code blurring before my eyes. "Well, it's about the wedding." Of course it was. Jessica's first marriage to Ethan had imploded after less than 2 years in a spectacular divorce, the details of which were whispered about in their country club circles. Now, she was engaged again, this time to Brent, the investment fund manager my mother wouldn't shut up about. He was, in her words, a major upgrade. "What about it?" I asked, already bracing myself. "We're trying to finalize the budget, and things are just so expensive these days. You know how Jessica has her heart set on that beautiful venue by the water, and she simply must have the peonies." She let the sentence trail off, a baited hook dangling in the silence. I didn't bite. "Okay." A sigh of exasperation crackled through the phone. "Well, your father and I are contributing as much as we can, but we're a little stretched. We were hoping you could help out. For your sister." There it was. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. Help out how? We were thinking, well, the number we came up with was $50,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $50,000. I was silent for a long moment, the hum of the servers in the office filling the void. It wasn't that I couldn't afford it. By then, my company was profitable, and I had a healthy amount of savings. It was the sheer, unadulterated audacity of the request. They had refused to help me with $5,000 for an educational opportunity that could have changed my life, but they expected me to drop $50,000 for a party, for a second wedding, for the sister who had never once asked me about my work, my life, or my well-being. "Mom," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, that's a lot of money." "Oh, Clara, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, the sweetness in her voice evaporating instantly, replaced by a familiar, sharp-edged impatience. "It's for family. Jessica deserves a perfect start to her new life. Besides, whatever it is you do with those computers must be paying well enough. It's your duty to help your sister. Duty. The word was a slap in the face. My duty was to be the family ATM, the silent benefactor for my sister's extravagant lifestyle. My hard work, my sleepless nights, my sacrifice, it was all just a resource to be tapped for Jessica's happiness. And then she delivered the final fatal blow. Honestly, it's about time you contributed something significant. Your father and I have invested everything in Jessica's success. It's the least you could do. And that was it. The snap. It wasn't loud. It was a quiet, clean break deep inside my chest. It was the sound of the last frayed thread of hope connecting me to them finally severing. The years of hurt, of feeling invisible, of being just fine, it all coalesced into a single moment of blinding, ice-cold clarity. They would never see me. They would never value me. They saw me only as a utility. I suddenly felt nothing. The pain was gone, replaced by a strange, chilling calm. The emotional fog I had lived in for 28 years had lifted, and I could see the path forward with perfect, crystalline precision. I was done trying to win an unwinnable game. I was done begging for scraps from their table. From now on, I would play a different game, by my rules. Okay, Mom, I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. I'll see what I can do. I hung up the phone before she could reply. I swiveled in my chair and created a new encrypted folder on my computer. I named it Receipts. The first file I saved in it was a screenshot of my bank account, followed by a detailed note of my mother's phone call, including the date, the time, and the exact amount requested. I would give them the money, but it wouldn't be a gift. It would be an investment in my own freedom, and I would make damn sure to keep every single receipt. The $50,000 check cleared my account 3 days later. I sent it via certified mail, and when the confirmation of receipt came back, signed by my mother, I scanned it and placed the digital copy neatly into the receipts folder. It was the first of many. That transaction became a firewall in my mind. On one side was the life I was supposed to live, the dutiful daughter, the supportive sister, the ATM. On the other side was the life I was actually building, brick by digital brick, in total silence. I stopped talking to them about my work. When they asked, which was rare, I would give them vague, one-word answers. It's fine. It's busy. They never pushed for more details. They didn't actually care. They were just performing the bare minimum of parental inquiry. Their disinterest became my greatest shield. While Jessica was picking out floral arrangements and cake flavors, I was in boardrooms, pitching SupplySync to national retailers. I hired my first 2 employees, then 5, then 10. We moved out of the small, cramped office and into a sleek space downtown with glass walls and a view of the city. Every success, every milestone was met with silence from my family. I closed a $250,000 deal with a major grocery chain. That same week, my mother sent a group text about Jessica finding the perfect Jimmy Choo shoes for the wedding. It was like living in a parallel universe. My only confidant during this time was Dr. Anya Sharma, my former university professor. She had been the first person to see the potential in SupplySync back when it was just a mess of code on my laptop. Now, she served on my company's advisory board, a sharp, grounding presence in the chaos of my life. One evening, over coffee, I confessed to her the suffocating invisibility I felt. They don't see me, Anya, I said, stirring my latte until it was just a brown swirl. It's like I'm speaking a language they can't understand. Anya, with her usual calm wisdom, reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Then, stop talking to them, Clara, she said softly. You don't need their validation. You have a gift. Build your empire. Let the work speak for itself. One day, it will speak so loudly, they won't be able to ignore it. Her words became my mantra. Let the work speak for itself. So I worked. I poured my lifeblood into SupplySync. We expanded our services, refined our code, and built a reputation for being the most reliable and innovative logistics software on the market. While my family was sending me photos of Jessica's dress fitting, I was flying to Chicago to finalize a 7-figure contract. While they were debating the guest list, I was securing $12 million in venture capital funding, a deal that valued my company at $60 million. I saved a digital copy of the term sheet in the receipts folder. Every request for money was documented. Clara, honey, the property tax on the house is just dreadful this year. A screenshot of the $15,000 transfer went into the folder. Clara, your father needs a new car. His old one is on its last legs. A copy of the $40,000 check went into the folder. They never asked how I could afford it. They didn't care. In their minds, they were entitled to it. I was the responsible one, the one who was good with money. They saw it as my function. The folder grew, becoming a digital monument to their entitlement. It contained scanned receipts for flights I'd bought them, for hotel rooms I'd paid for credit card bills I'd settled. It also contained emails where I'd tried, foolishly, to share a piece of good news, only to be met with a reply that pivoted immediately back to Jessica. That's nice, dear. By the way, Jessica's caterer just won a national award. We are so proud. Each one was a small paper cut to the soul. But instead of letting them bleed, I saved them. Every dismissive email, every manipulative text message, every one-sided phone call. They were all filed away, time-stamped, and organized. I was living a double life. To my family, I was the quiet, unassuming Clara, the reliable but uninteresting daughter who had some vague computer job. To the rest of the world, I was the founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country, and I realized I preferred it that way. Their ignorance was my armor. My success was my secret weapon, and I was sharpening it day by day, waiting for the right moment. Anya was right. The work was speaking, building to a crescendo. I just had to be patient enough to wait for the final, deafening boom. As Jessica's second wedding approached, the family chatter became almost unbearable. The central figure in this new, perfect chapter was, of course, Brent. According to my mother's breathless retellings, Brent was a titan of finance, a brilliant fund manager who was both wildly successful and deeply in love with my sister. He was the antidote to the embarrassment of her first divorce. A new character also entered the scene, my Aunt Sarah, my mother's younger sister. She was a woman who weaponized sweetness, whose every compliment came with a hidden barb. She appointed herself the family's chief emotional manipulator, and I was her primary target. "Oh, Clara," she'd say during her frequent calls, her voice dripping with concern. "It must be so hard for you watching your sister be so happy. Don't you worry, your time will come. For now, it's just so important that you support her. She needs you." Support, in my family's dialect, was a synonym for money. Aunt Sarah was the one who would call to casually mention that Brent was looking for investors for a can't-miss real estate opportunity. "Just a small, friendly family investment," she'd coo. "It would be such a wonderful wedding gift." Something about Brent never sat right with me. It was the way he talked, all buzzwords and no substance. It was the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. It was the way he looked at my parents' house, not like a future son-in-law, but like an appraiser. My programmer's brain, trained to spot anomalies and bugs in a system, was screaming that the system of Brent was deeply flawed. So one night, I did what I do best. I investigated. It wasn't hard. People who build their lives on a facade of wealth often leave a trail of digital breadcrumbs. I used a few professional background check services I had access to through my company's legal team and did some deep diving into public records. It took me less than 3 hours to uncover the truth. The first domino to fall was his much-touted investment fund. It was real, but it was also hemorrhaging money. A string of bad investments had left it on the brink of collapse. Then I found the property records. The luxury condo he claimed to own was a rental, and he was 3 months behind on payments. The final nail in the coffin was a series of recently filed lawsuits from angry investors and a massive 6-figure lien from the IRS for unpaid taxes. Brent wasn't a titan of finance. He was a fraud, a desperate man clinging to the wreckage of his career, looking for a life raft. And my sister, with her family's comfortable but not inexhaustible wealth, was that life raft. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the monitor illuminating the damning evidence. A wave of something cold and bitter washed through me. It wasn't shock. It was a grim, sickening confirmation of what I already suspected. They weren't just ignoring me. They were actively trying to fleece me, using my sister's wedding as cover. I took a screenshot of everything. The lawsuits, the tax liens, the eviction notices. I compiled it all into a neat PDF, password protected it, and saved it in a new subfolder within Receipts. I labeled it Brent. For a fleeting second, I considered sending it to my parents. I imagined their shock, the chaos it would cause, but I stopped myself. What would it accomplish? They wouldn't believe me. They would accuse me of being jealous, of trying to ruin Jessica's happiness. They were so invested in the fantasy of Brent, the major upgrade, that they would cling to it with everything they had. They would choose the comfortable lie over the inconvenient truth. They always did. No, this information was not for them. It was for me. It was another piece of evidence, another brick in the wall I was building between my life and theirs. It was a weapon, and like any good strategist, I knew you never reveal your best weapon until the final battle. So I played along. The next time Aunt Sarah called to ask about the investment opportunity, I politely declined. "Oh, Clara," she sighed, her voice thick with disappointment. "You're always so cautious. Sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith for family." I smiled to myself, a cold, humorless smile. "You're right, Aunt Sarah," I said. "I am cautious. I like to know exactly what I'm investing in." She didn't catch the double meaning. Of course she didn't. In their world, I was just the boring, sensible daughter. They had no idea I was the one holding the map that showed exactly where all the bodies were buried. By the time I was 27, Supply Sync wasn't just a success. It was a phenomenon. We were the undisputed leader in our niche, with a client list that included some of the biggest names in retail and logistics. The work was no longer speaking, it was shouting, and the giants of the tech world had started to listen. The acquisition offers began as a trickle, then became a flood. A hotshot Silicon Valley firm offered $120 million, but their plan was to absorb our tech and lay off most of my team. I said no. My team had bled for this company. I wasn't about to sell them out. A European conglomerate offered $170 million, but the deal required me to relocate to Frankfurt and fold my brand into theirs. I said no. Supply Sync was my creation, and I wasn't going to let it be erased. I knew my company's worth, and I wasn't just talking about the monetary value. I was talking about its soul, its culture, the team of brilliant people who had believed in me when I was just a girl with a laptop and an idea. I had spent a lifetime being undervalued. I was done with that. Then I got a call from Eleanor Vance. Eleanor Vance was a legend. The CEO of Innovax Technologies, she was one of the few women who had shattered the glass ceiling in the male-dominated tech industry. She was sharp, ruthless in business, but fair. When she asked for a meeting, I knew this was different. We met in a neutral location, a quiet hotel conference room halfway between our two headquarters. She walked in, not with an army of suits, but alone. She was in her late 50s, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. She didn't waste time with small talk. "Clara," she began, her voice crisp and direct, "I've been following Supply Sync for 2 years. What you've built is remarkable. Your code is elegant, your business model is airtight, and your team is fiercely loyal. I'm not here to buy your company and tear it apart for scraps. I'm here to give it the global platform it deserves." For the next hour, she laid out her vision. Inavix didn't want to absorb SupplySync. They wanted to partner with it. They would provide the resources, the global network, the capital to scale in a way I could only dream of. But she had one non-negotiable condition. "This deal only works if you stay on as CEO," she said, looking me directly in the eye. "You are the heart of this company. Without you, it's just lines of code. I'm not investing in your software. I'm investing in you." I was stunned. For my entire life, my own family had treated my work as a trivial little hobby. My father had once suggested I should get a real job at his insurance firm. And here was one of the most powerful women in technology telling me that I, not just my company, but me, was a 9-figure investment. It was a validation so profound, it almost brought me to tears. The negotiations took 3 months. They were tough, but respectful. I laid out my terms. My entire team had to be retained with their current salaries and positions guaranteed for at least 3 years. Our headquarters had to remain where they were, and I would retain full operational control as CEO, reporting directly to Eleanor. Her legal team balked. They said my demands were unprecedented for an acquisition of this size, but Eleanor overruled them. "She built the damn thing," I overheard her saying on a conference call. "She knows how to run it. Pay the woman what she's worth." The final offer came in at $280 million. My lawyer reviewed the final papers, his eyes wide. "Clara, this is an incredible deal," he said. "They met every single one of your demands." I nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "I know my worth," I said, the words feeling solid and true on my tongue. "I've spent my whole life letting other people define it for me. I'm done with that." The deal was signed on a rainy Tuesday. There were no champagne bottles popped, no big celebrations, just a quiet handshake with Eleanor and a profound sense of gravity. After capital gains taxes, legal fees, and payouts to my early investors, my personal, liquid net worth would be just over $160 million. The money transferred to my private bank account a week later. I opened the banking app on my phone and stared at the number. It didn't seem real. It was more money than my family could comprehend, more money than they could ever spend. It wasn't just wealth. It was power. It was security. It was freedom. It was a shield, a sword, and a full-scale army, all rolled into one. And as Thanksgiving loomed, I knew it was finally time to go home, not as the invisible daughter, but as the person I had become, on my own terms. The work had spoken. Now, it was my turn. I drove to my parents' house in my modest 4-year-old sedan. There was no point in showing off. Theatrics weren't necessary. The truth, I knew, would be explosive enough on its own. As I pulled into the familiar driveway, I saw Brent's brand new Mercedes parked near the front, a car I knew for a fact that he couldn't afford. The lie had already begun before I even stepped out of my vehicle. The moment I walked through the door, the air was thick with the cloying sweetness of Jessica's success. The scent of roasting turkey and cinnamon was overpowered by the smell of self-congratulation. "Clara, you made it," my mother said, kissing the air beside my cheek. Her eyes immediately darted past me, scanning the driveway. "Oh, you're still driving that old thing?" "It gets me where I need to go," I said, my voice even. The entire afternoon was a performance, and I was the sole audience member. Every conversation was a carefully scripted ode to Jessica and Brent. We heard about the promotion, a senior vice president title that I knew was a desperate gambit by his failing company to maintain appearances. We heard about the house they were closing on in Greenwich, a sprawling estate I knew was leveraged to the hilt with loans he had no way of repaying. We heard about the planned $250,000 wedding, the honeymoon in the Maldives, the future children who would, of course, attend private schools. My father, Richard, held court at the head of the table, beaming at Brent as if he were a visiting king. "That's my boy," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Knew you had it in you the moment I met you." My sister, Jessica, preened under the attention. She sat there, flashing her obscenely large engagement ring, interrupting every story to add a detail about herself. She was a black hole of need, sucking all the energy and attention in the room into her orbit. I sat in my usual spot, the forgotten seat at the corner of the table, and I watched. I didn't participate. I just observed, like a scientist studying a foreign species. I saw the desperation in Brent's eyes behind his confident smile. I saw the smug satisfaction on my mother's face. I saw the willful ignorance of my father. And I saw the bottomless insecurity that fueled my sister's narcissism. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound, almost surgical detachment. I was no longer a part of this toxic ecosystem. I was an outsider looking in. They barely spoke to me. A few perfunctory questions. "How's work, Clara? Still living in that little apartment?" I gave them the same vague answers I always did. They were satisfied with that. It confirmed their narrative. Clara was stagnant, predictable, and most importantly, no threat to Jessica's spotlight. The climax of the performance came during dessert. My mother brought out a pumpkin pie, and my father tapped his glass for an announcement. "As you all know," he began, his chest puffed out, "our Jessica and her wonderful fiancé Brent are starting a new life together. We've given them what we can to start, but building a future in a place like Greenwich isn't easy. It takes capital." Here we go, I thought, my hand steady as I took a sip of water. He continued, his eyes scanning the table before briefly and dismissively glancing at me. "Brent has a new venture, a real estate fund. That's going to be huge. We're all going to support him, because that's what family does. We lift each other up." Jessica reached over and squeezed Brent's hand. "We're so excited. It's going to secure our future." It was the perfect opening, the one I had been waiting for. They had laid the trap themselves. There was a lull in the conversation as everyone dug into their pie. The silence stretched for a moment, and in that quiet space, my father finally turned to me, an afterthought as always. His tone was dismissive, almost bored, the way you'd ask a child about their day at school. "So, Clara," he said, not quite making eye contact. "You still doing that little computer thing of yours?" The entire table went quiet. All eyes turned to me. It wasn't a question of genuine interest. It was a gesture of pity, a way to highlight the chasm between my small, insignificant life and Jessica's grand, important one. I put down my fork slowly, deliberately. I looked at my father, then at my mother, at Jessica, and finally at Brent. I held their gazes for a moment, letting the silence hang in the air. And then I smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Actually, Dad," I said, my voice clear and calm, resonating in the quiet room, "I sold the little computer thing." The air in the room shifted. My father's condescending expression flickered with surprise. My mother paused with a forkful of pie halfway to her mouth. It was Jessica who spoke first, her voice dripping with the kind of faux pity she had perfected over a lifetime. "Oh, honey, did it not work out? Don't worry, Dad can always find a place for you at his insurance company. It's never too late to start a real career. Brent chuckled, a low, patronizing sound. Yeah, the tech world is tough, Clara. Better to stick to what you know. I let their words hang in the air, savoring the moment. I savored their arrogance, their complete and utter blindness. They were writing the final lines of their own tragic comedy, and they didn't even know it. I kept the smile on my face, calm and unwavering. "Oh, it worked out," I said. My father grunted. "Well, good for you. Did you make a little something for your trouble?" I took a slow sip of water, my eyes locking with his. You could say that. The atmosphere was thick with tension now. They could sense that something was off. The script wasn't playing out the way it was supposed to. I wasn't supposed to be smiling. I was supposed to be sheepish, embarrassed, the failed daughter returning to the fold. "Well, don't keep us in suspense," my mother chirped, a nervous edge to her voice. "How much did you sell your little project for?" I leaned forward slightly, placing my hands on the table. I made sure to look at each of them in turn, letting my gaze linger for a second before moving to the next. I was the one in control now. The invisible girl was about to become the only thing in the room they could see. "I sold it to Innovix Technologies," I began, the name dropping onto the table like a block of granite. I saw a flicker of recognition in Brent's eyes. He knew the name. Of course he did. "The final deal," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand, was valued at $280 million. Silence. A deep, profound, suffocating silence. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. My mother's hand holding the fork was frozen in midair. Jessica's perfectly made-up face went slack, her jaw literally dropping open as a small, disbelieving gasp escaped her lips. But the best reaction was my father's. His face, which had been a mask of smug paternalism just moments before, drained of all color. His eyes were wide with shock. His hand trembled, and the heavy silver fork he was holding slipped from his grasp, clattering onto his porcelain plate with a deafeningly loud clang. The sound shattered the silence, but no one moved. They just stared at me, their faces a mixture of disbelief, shock, and a dawning, horrified understanding. It was Brent who found his voice first, a choked, incredulous laugh. That's not possible. You're joking." "And after taxes, legal fees, and other distributions," I continued, ignoring him completely, my eyes still on my father, "my personal take-home amount was $160 million. My mother made a small, wounded sound in the back of her throat. Jessica's face, which had been pale, was now turning a blotchy, furious red. She looked from me to my parents and back again, as if searching for someone to tell her this was all a prank. But they knew. Looking into my calm, steady eyes, they knew it was the truth. The little computer thing, the hobby, the daughter they had written off as just fine had just rewritten the entire family legacy in 2 sentences. The power dynamic at that table hadn't just shifted, it had been utterly and irrevocably annihilated. And in its place was a new reality, one they could never have imagined, one where I held all the cards. Thank you so much for staying with me through that. You are a truly wonderful and patient audience. If you've been on this journey with me this far, please do me a huge favor and like this video and comment the number 1 down below. It lets me know you're here with me. Your support is a bigger encouragement than you could ever know. So please comment the number 1 and let's see this through to the end together. The aftermath of the Thanksgiving dinner was a storm of chaos I watched from a safe, self-imposed distance. My phone blew up with a flurry of texts and missed calls, a digital tantrum of epic proportions. There were furious messages from Jessica, accusing me of lying, of trying to ruin her engagement announcement, of being a jealous monster. There were pleading messages from my mother, begging me to talk things over and not be so dramatic. My father remained silent, a testament to his shock and utter inability to process the new reality. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I blocked their numbers, all of them. The silence drove them insane. About a week later, the real offensive began. I received a letter from a law firm, Henderson and Lynch. The name, of course, came from a recommendation by Brent. They were representing my parents and my sister. The letter was a masterpiece of legal fiction. It claimed that the idea for Supply Sync was developed during family discussions, using my father's business acumen as a foundation. It alleged that I had used family resources, their internet, the electricity in my childhood bedroom, to build the initial prototype. It was a pathetic, transparent cash grab, but it was also a declaration of war. They weren't just angry, they were greedy, and their greed had made them stupid. They were formally demanding $5 million as reimbursement for the family's investment in my education and upbringing, and for their intellectual contribution to the business. I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a sharp, brittle laugh of disbelief. After a lifetime of neglect, they now wanted to retroactively claim credit for my success. They wanted a return on an investment they never made. I forwarded the letter to my own legal team, a group of cutthroat corporate lawyers who had negotiated my 9-figure deal. My lead counsel, a sharp woman named Maria, called me within the hour. "This is a joke, Clara," she said, her voice devoid of amusement. "It's a frivolous shakedown. We can get this thrown out of court in a heartbeat." "I know," I said, "but I don't want it thrown out. I want to fight it. I want a hearing." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" Maria asked. "It'll get messy. They'll drag your name through the mud." "Let them try," I said, my voice cold as ice. "They've been doing that for free my whole life. It's time I made them pay for it." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a month later. I walked into the courthouse feeling absolutely calm. I had spent 2 years preparing for this moment. My family was on the other side of the room, a united front of indignation. My father looked grim. My mother looked like she was on the verge of tears, and Jessica stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. Brent stood beside her, his arm possessively around her, whispering in her ear. Their lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was a pompous man in an expensive suit who looked at me with open contempt. They presented their case first. It was even more absurd in person. My father testified that he had given me countless hours of business advice. My mother tearfully described how she had supported my dreams by making sure I had a quiet place to work. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. Then they called their star witness. I was genuinely surprised when I saw him walk to the stand. It was Mark, my ex-boyfriend from college. The one who had told me my idea for Supply Sync was cute, but would never amount to anything. I watched, fascinated, as he lied under oath. He claimed that he and I had developed the idea for Supply Sync together as a class project, and that I had stolen it from him after we broke up. It was a complete fabrication. Mr. Henderson presented emails from our college days, innocuous messages about meeting for coffee, as evidence of their deep collaboration. It was a clumsy, desperate move, and it was exactly what I had hoped for. Their entire case was built on lies, on a rewritten history designed to paint me as an ungrateful thief. They were so blinded by their arrogance and entitlement that they believed they could simply invent a new reality and a judge would accept it. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea about the folder named Receipts. When it was my turn, Maria didn't call me to the stand. She didn't need to. "Your Honor," she began, her voice ringing with confidence, "the plaintiff's entire case is predicated on the idea of a supportive, financially and emotionally invested family who were instrumental in my client's success. We are here today to prove with irrefutable evidence that the exact opposite is true." And then she opened the floodgates. One by one, she presented the exhibits. The bank statement showing the $50,000 transfer for Jessica's wedding, the scanned receipts for their vacations, their cars, their bills, all paid by me. The emails projected onto a large screen for the entire court to see, where my business announcements were met with dismissive replies about my sister's shopping trips. The courtroom was silent, save for Maria's steady voice and the occasional gasp from the gallery. I could see the color draining from my parents' faces. Mr. Henderson's smug expression had been replaced by a look of growing panic. Maria then turned her attention to Mark. She presented the time-stamped, digitally signed code commits from the earliest days of SupplySync, proving I had written every single line of the original code myself, a year before I even met him. Then she played a voicemail Mark had left me after our breakup, a drunken, rambling message where he called my project a stupid waste of time. His credibility evaporated in an instant, but the final, devastating blow was reserved for Brent. Maria presented the file I had compiled on him. The court saw the evidence of his failing business, his massive debts, the lawsuits, the IRS lien. She then presented text messages between my Aunt Sarah and my mother, obtained during discovery, where they openly discussed getting me to invest in Brent's fund as a way to help him get back on his feet after the wedding. It was no longer a case about family investment. It was a clear, documented case of attempted fraud. Mr. Henderson was on his feet, shouting objections, but it was too late. The damage was done. The narrative they had so carefully constructed had been dismantled, piece by piece, with cold, hard facts. They had brought a knife to a gunfight, and I had just revealed my entire arsenal. The family who claimed to have built me up was exposed as a pack of leeches, led by a con artist. The truth, as I had known it would be, was undeniable. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Judge Thompson, had listened to the entire presentation with an unreadable expression. But as the evidence of Brent's financial ruin and the family's conspiracy to solicit my investment filled the screen, I saw her jaw tighten. Her eyes, like chips of flint, bored into my family and their lawyer. When Maria rested our case, Judge Thompson took off her glasses and rubbed her temples, a gesture of profound weariness and deep-seated irritation. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Mr. Henderson was sputtering, trying to salvage the situation, but the judge held up a hand, silencing him instantly. She turned to Mark, who was still on the witness stand, looking pale and sick. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice dangerously low, "you are aware that you are under oath, correct?" Mark swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you are aware of the legal definition of perjury?" His face went from pale to ghostly white. He stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Judge Thompson didn't need an answer. She made a note on her legal pad, her pen scratching loudly in the silent room. Then she turned her gaze upon my family. "Mr. and Mrs. Reed," she began, addressing my parents. "For the past 2 hours, I have listened to you describe a reality that bears absolutely no resemblance to the documented evidence presented before this court. You have not described a financial investment. You have described a pattern of financial and emotional exploitation." My mother let out a small sob, burying her face in her hands. My father just stared blankly ahead, his face a mask of stone. "You claim to have provided the foundation for your daughter's success?" the judge continued, her voice rising with controlled fury. "Yet the evidence shows that at every turn you dismissed her achievements, ignored her potential, and treated her as a financial resource to fund the lifestyle of your other daughter. You speak of a return on investment." "It seems to me the only person in this room owed a return on investment is your daughter, Clara." She then turned to Jessica and Brent. "And as for you two, your attempt to solicit a fraudulent investment from Miss Reed under the guise of family loyalty is not only morally reprehensible, but borders on criminal. Mr. Henderson," she said, her eyes snapping to their lawyer, "I would advise you to have a long talk with your clients about the potential consequences of filing a malicious lawsuit and attempting to defraud an individual." Mr. Henderson looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Finally, Judge Thompson looked at me. For the first time, her expression softened slightly, not with pity, but with a measure of respect. "Miss Reed," she said, "you have endured a great deal. This court is not blind to the context behind these proceedings. The plaintiff's case is dismissed, with prejudice. This means it can never be brought before a court again. Furthermore, the plaintiffs are ordered to pay all of Miss Reed's legal fees associated with this frivolous lawsuit." Bang. The sound of the gavel was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of validation. It was the sound of the end. My family sat there, stunned into silence, utterly defeated. Their arrogance had led them to this public humiliation. They had tried to take $5 million from me, and now they owed my lawyers nearly $200,000. Brent was exposed as a fraud, and Mark was facing a potential perjury charge. It was a more complete and devastating victory than I could have ever imagined. As we were leaving the courtroom, Jessica, her face contorted with rage and humiliation, broke away from Brent and lunged toward me. "You did this to ruin me," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the marble hallway. "You were always jealous, you hateful little—" Before she could finish, 2 bailiffs intercepted her, holding her back. I just looked at her, at this woman who had been the sun in my family's solar system for so long, now reduced to a screaming, helpless mess. And I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, no satisfaction, just emptiness. "I didn't do this to you, Jessica," I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through her hysterics. "You did this to yourselves." I turned and walked away, not looking back. I didn't need to. That chapter of my life was over. I had all the closure I needed. The receipts had been tallied, the debts had been paid, and the case was officially closed. In the weeks that followed, my lawyers secured a permanent restraining order against every member of my immediate family, as well as Brent and Aunt Sarah. It was a legal formality, but it was also a powerful symbol. The wall I had been building for years was now fortified by the law. I never heard the full details of the fallout, only bits and pieces. Jessica's fairy tale wedding to Brent was called off. His financial implosion became public knowledge, and he was last seen trying to rebrand himself as a life coach. My parents sold their house and downsized, the legal fees having taken a significant bite out of their retirement savings. They had gambled on my guilt and lost everything. I felt no joy in their ruin. Their self-destruction was a hollow victory. The real prize wasn't their failure. It was my peace. With the noise of my past finally silenced, I could focus on the future. I threw myself back into my work at Innovix, but with a new sense of purpose. The money, I realized, was not the end goal. It was a tool, a means to build something new, something better. 6 months after the court case, I established the Reed Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing scholarships and seed funding for young women and underrepresented minorities in the tech industry. I wanted to give other talented outsiders the chance my own family had denied me. The first charity gala for the foundation was held in a grand ballroom downtown. As I stood at the podium looking out at a sea of faces, young entrepreneurs, students, tech leaders, I felt a sense of belonging that my family's house had never given me. I told them my story, not the angry, bitter parts, but the story of resilience, of finding value in oneself when no one else will. After my speech, a young woman approached me. She was a first-generation college student studying engineering. "Your story," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It made me feel less alone. Thank you." In that moment, I understood. This was the real vindication. Not the courtroom victory, not the money, but this. Taking the pain of my past and transforming it into a bridge for someone else's future. It was a purpose far more satisfying than revenge. My life is quiet now, and I like it that way. It's filled with work I love, friends who respect me, and the satisfaction of making a tangible difference in the world. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that Thanksgiving dinner. I think about the girl who used to sit at the corner of the table, invisible and silent. She's not here anymore. I learned a hard lesson. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't your real family. Sometimes you have to go out and build your own, one based not on obligation or blood, but on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love. It's a longer, harder path, but the destination is worth it. It's a place called peace, and I am finally home. Thank you for listening to my whole story. I truly, deeply appreciate you being here. If you've made it to the very end, please comment the letter A below, so I know you're one of the special ones who saw it all the way through. If you have any thoughts or feelings about what you've heard, I'd love to read them. And please, feel free to check out the other stories on my channel. Thank you again.